Hello everybody, welcome to Success Defined. I'm Ben McDonald. Today I'm able to sit down with Mac Lackey. Mac is a successful serial entrepreneur. He's invested in startups. He's sat on board of directors for some public companies. He's had multiple 8-figure exits, which is extremely impressive, and we'll dive into that. And he is a devoted husband and father. So we're going to talk a lot about both the business side and the family and personal side and kind of how you blend them. So Mac, thanks for taking the time to sit down.
Thanks for having me. Excited about it.
So I want to start off with you in college, because you had really a tipping point, transformation type point. Can you go into that story a little bit?
Sure.
And then follow that up with really how that changed your outlook on going forward?
Yeah, tipping point is a good way to put it. So, up until college, my life was very focused on soccer. It was kind of my passion. I played. I went to school on soccer scholarship in college, and I was actually kicked out of college. And so, in that process, it was about as extreme as you can be in terms of an eye opener. And I felt like my education is disappearing. I lost my scholarship, and sort of life just was ripping away from me. And so it was a moment that I really had to step back, think about what was important in life, because up to that point it was kind of soccer and having fun.
Right.
And
like most college students.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a little too extreme, but so it really, and I was fortunate. My family, my parents understood what a tough time I was going through, and so rather than saying, "All right, well, you screwed up, you're in the ditch," they sort of took me back in. I got my kind of life reframed in my mind, and then went back to school, played soccer, and that really was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was such a kind of punch in the face. Yep. And then from that point on, I've had plenty of challenges like everyone, but I've had a very good path, because I think that sort of reframed how I looked at life.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And any time you have to go through something like that and have some sort of wake-up call, it's obviously going to make you reconsider some things, but it's just so interesting to see that change and how quickly it happened, because right after graduating, you got exposed to startups. You were an employee there at a company, correct?
Yeah, so after graduating, I played 1 year professionally, so soccer kind of met its natural end for me. Yeah. And honestly, up until that point, I had really never thought about what I wanted to do. And I was given an opportunity to join a small startup. I had a friend that I met playing soccer, which is was my whole network back in those days. And I joined in the marketing department. It was probably 6 or 7 people at that point. And it was only because a startup and a friendship was probably the only legitimate way I was going to find an opportunity. I wasn't qualified to do anything.
Right.
So, getting into this company, I literally within a week fell in love with startups. And it was because every day was so different, and the company was so small that sort of notion of having to wear a lot of hats was my reality right out of the gates. And I was the low man on the totem pole. So I didn't always have the coolest hats to wear, because I was answering phones and taking out trash and everything. Yeah. But that sort of excitement and energy and diversity of task was just awesome. Yeah. That was kind of how I got started and kind of fell in love with startups.
Was that the first exposure you had to entrepreneurship, or was it within your family before? How did that work?
It was really, I think, legitimately my first exposure.
Okay.
My father had worked, I learned work ethic from him. He was a third shift engineer that worked, a night shift, and kind of worked his way up into management with a larger company. So I watched that progression as I was a child, and I'm an only child, so I sat around the dinner table and we talked about business, and we talked about my dad's day, but a lot of that was kind of interestingly about what he didn't like about corporate America and bureaucracy.
Okay, so you just heard the negative of the other side.
Exactly, and he did an awesome job of helping me, not feel like I had to choose that kind of path. And I saw some of his frustrations, and he was very successful. So it wasn't, but it was just you around the dinner table, you talk about your boss and politics and things that are going on.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the backdrop, and then this company was my first exposure, although I had another kind of pivotal moment where very early in that company, the president of the business had a kind of an all hands meeting, which again, all hands was 6 people, and it was to talk about strategy. And so he said, okay, everybody, let's go in my office. And, I'm excited to talk about strategy, kind of grab my notebook, and he puts up his hand and says, why don't you stay and answer the phones? And it was such like a, ego blow and hard hit. And I thought, it was literally the first moment, and I'd only been there like a week. So I had no, reason to be in the strategy meeting.
Yeah.
But it was such a moment where I thought, I'm going to struggle not being a contributor. And from that point on, I was like, I'm going to start my own company. It just became an obvious thing. So I only lasted there 6 months. So my work experience without being an entrepreneur was basically 6 months working for a startup.
Right. So you partially answered exactly where I was going to go, but you had a really short period of time until you started your first company.
I did.
And so that ego check was probably a big motivator for it. But to go from no exposure to entrepreneurship, starting a company, anything like that, how are you then confident and comfortable to then go after your own opportunity?
It's interesting. People talk a lot about what sort of shapes an entrepreneur, and I really don't think there's any magical formula. Of course, I have the benefit of hindsight, and I can look back and see what I did and what others that I've worked with have done over the years. But I think for me, it was some combination of that ego check, which was interesting. I was not necessarily confident in business because I really didn't have any experience yet, but I was very confident in the concept of controlling my own destiny.
Okay.
And so I really wanted to give it a shot, and I believed in myself. I had a business partner who was very smart and talented, and we were sort of in it together. And I had at that point a fiance who is now my wife,
right.
Who was also supportive, and so I had a support structure. But a lot of it was I really just wanted to give it a shot. I really believed that I needed to have my own opportunity, and so fortunately it worked, and so it was a self-reinforcing process. I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs that their first effort isn't successful, which I think is probably I've had plenty of challenges and failures, so it's not to say everything I've done has worked, but that first one I really hung it out there. I took a huge risk, and the fact that it ended well reinforced that everything I loved about it and all the reasons I chose to do it. Now I was really excited about it. So,
yep. And your first company, you started it with a $10,000 loan from a family member, right?
Correct. Yes.
Then going forward in other opportunities, then you get into raising money and things like that. So can you hit on that a little bit? Because I think that's a point where a lot of people looking to start companies, they don't know where to go. And You've got a lot of information on that.
Yeah, I think it's again one of those situations where looking back over what's now 23 years as an entrepreneur, I have a lot of opinions, but my own path was, as you just said, I got a $10,000 loan from a family member. We used that to start this business, worked out of a 1-bedroom apartment. It was what now people would call a garage startup. I mean, it was a struggle. My desk was my dining room table. It was really a humble, challenging startup, and so that money was just enough to buy a computer and a few things that we needed to just get going.
Yeah.
But it was a struggle, and so after we sold that company, we had a great exit. The company that purchased us went public, and I looked at how they had built that business, which was through raising capital.
Okay.
And I thought, for me, the idea of starting another company is for sure going to happen. But I want the accelerant of I don't want to struggle. I feel like, hey, I've done it now. I feel confident. I want to move quicker. And so raising capital for me at that point was all about sort of speed to market.
Yeah.
And we did, we raised a couple $1 million from what people would call friends and family, relationships that I have. It's something that I talk a lot about when I'm advising young entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. It is far and away the most available and likely source of capital because these are the people that know you and trust you.
Right.
So friends and family, and that company, we raised a couple $1 million, but we built it and sold it in about 14 months. So a little over a year, had a big, 8-figure exit, great return to investors. So again, it was kind of a reinforcing process.
Right.
But over the years, and it's something, like I said, I talk a lot about today. As a matter of fact, I'm launching a course about how to help young entrepreneurs, or maybe not young in age, but inexperienced entrepreneurs look at raising capital. And I've done, companies that have raised no capital. I've done companies that raise very little. I've raised, significant amounts, millions and millions for certain companies. So the context of what the business objective of the company really dictates: should you raise capital? What kind of capital? Where does it come from? Yeah. So I tend to help people try to narrow that down, and then if they decide they really need to raise capital, I have a little bit of a playbook I think worked well for me that I try to kind of share with others.
That's perfect. I think that's going to be a great tool that's valuable to people. So I'll make sure that we get all the information, put it in the show notes at the end. So
that'd be great.
So let's go back to your story a little bit. You then, after those first two companies in your mid-20s, you went on to do other things. Mm-hmm. But from the personal side, you could have rode the coattails of those two and kind of coasted for a while, right? And lived off of that. What gave you the desire to keep going versus taking a step back and relaxing?
I think it's for me, it's personality. To some degree, I'm a pretty driven person. And so even though maybe mathematically I could have looked at it and said, gosh, I could, sit on the beach, and the other thing is, I think it's okay. I mean, the reality is, if you look at my life today, because I have, quote, matured in my worldview, I think, I hope, and my priorities have shifted. I have kids that I want to spend a lot of time with. But, in my early 20s, I did do some of the typical things. I sold my first company and I was in line to get the supercar I always wanted, know. And so I checked some of the material boxes.
Right, the stereotypical things that come along with it.
Right, and that was a big part of not what I cared about, but it was part of the, for me to feel like the sacrifices, particularly the first company, because it was tough. I mean, when you look back, you're like, oh, that was great. Well, I mean, there were plenty of nights my co-founder and I sat at a coffee shop almost in tears thinking, can you make it another week? I mean, it was tough. And so when you have that kind of sacrifice, your wife is supporting that, and you have an outcome, it's like, what are the rewards of the outcome? And the rewards were travel more, buy what you want, buy your wife some nice things. But then, I realized that everybody says it, and it's very true in my case, is once you sort of check those boxes, it's kind of like, all right, well, I still love cars, but now that's not a priority for me. It's something different. And so I learned that. Maybe I was fortunate that I went through that very early in life, so my sort of perspective broadened out, and I said, okay, what matters now? And it's for me to, even at that early point, work on something I was really passionate about, spend time on things that I get a lot of energy from. And I had a lot of choices and options. And so it became easier for me to say, it's not about the money, it's about passion, it's about what works for my family. Right. So framework changed. No,
it's really interesting. And obviously being called Success Defined, we dig into those things. But it seems like you learned at an early age that the stereotypical success of what people chase after wasn't giving you the satisfaction that you were really looking for. It was working on projects you were passionate about, continuing to grow yourself as a person, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I would say, and I hope that your audience can appreciate this, is that if you look at my 23 years as an entrepreneur, even though I had some early success, there were moments where if you looked at the reality, if you peered through my life and looked at my bank account,
right,
you would be like, wow, he has got no money sitting there. Like, how's he living like this? And I basically, for many years, I mean, we sold some companies, had some liquidity, and then I didn't have income for a long time because I was working on projects that didn't pay me.
Yep.
And so I was just taking that, what you would maybe call a nest egg, and just burning it down. Yeah. But I never changed the priority. So like when we didn't have the money to afford to keep our kids in private school, that was a priority. When we didn't have money to take trips to Europe so that they could be exposed to things I was never exposed to, it was a priority. So you'd look at my bank account, if you were a rational person or a financial advisor, and go like, you have no business getting on a plane and going to Europe right now. Right. You need to make some money. So that to me is really a big part of why you choose to be an entrepreneur, is you control those things. And I don't care what the optics are. I don't care what anybody thinks, really, other than my family and my close friends. And so I say that just to say, not only does the definition of success mean something different to me, the reason I go into any of that detail is because I think a lot of times people are like, well, that's easy for him to say. He's made his money. Right. Well, there were plenty of points well after that if you would have looked at me, you would have thought he's actually going to go bankrupt before he's going to have any more success. And so I committed to that framework even when it wasn't logical. Mm-hmm. So it's been important to me, all those through the ups and downs.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take a look at after those first two companies. Mm-hmm. What are one or two lessons that you were able to take from those experiences that led to more future successes?
I think probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned early is that, the people matter more than anything. So who you hire, who you work with, who your investors are, that becomes almost a prerequisite to the size of outcome or the type of success you have. If you work with amazing people, the chances of having amazing outcomes go up exponentially. Yeah. If you work with investors who understand how you think in your life, given, again, my priorities around my family, for example, if I had a group of investors that would not allow me to spend time with my family, there'd be this automatic disconnect. Yeah. So in order for me to live my priorities, I had to really think carefully about who I spend time with, what the expectations are. So that sort of people dynamic has been one of the most important factors. Yep. And it's allowed me to be, if you look back at the companies I've had technical companies. I'm not a technical person. I've had companies, I've run funds. I'm not a financial person. I consider myself, if I have skills, there aren't many of them, but strategy and a few things, sales maybe. So I've surrounded myself with people that have those great skills. And then the other one that I think a lot about still to this day is kind of how you get leverage on your business model. And selfishly, I do that because I don't want to work 24/7. I don't want to have everything so dependent on me that if I don't check email at 2 a.m. or on a Friday, the business is going to fall apart. So in order to create a business model that allows that, I have to have a lot of leverage, meaning I have great alignment with my team. I have third parties that know what our processes are. I have someone that helps us scale, and that leverage becomes how you can live this life, right? And so those are things I learned, and I look back at what worked, what didn't, what felt great, where was I challenged, and those are some of at least two of the quick things I'd say bubbled up for me.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So I want to go back to the first of those two that you talked about, the people, right? What's your take on partners starting a company, partners versus starting something on your own and just getting people underneath you?
That's a important question, only because my thinking on that has evolved and changed dramatically. Okay. I, for most of my life and career, have had business partners. Yep. My first company, I had several partners. I have had a long-time co-founder of several of my companies that was a 50-50 partner. And the reason I say that is because I was very lucky and fortunate that, in particular, my longtime co-founder is someone that I've had a great relationship with. It's very, there's a lot of synergy. We have different perspectives, we have different backgrounds, but there's a deep level of trust and mutual respect, and we complement one another. Okay. But that is unfortunately the exception. Right. And so if you would have asked me a couple years ago, I would have been like, co-founders are great, partners are awesome, but I have had more challenges with partners than I've had success with partners. I have had a great partner, but I've had most of my businesses, even if they weren't bad outcomes, even if they weren't, they weren't like fist fights in the hallway kind of things, but the dynamics of a partnership are very, very similar to a marriage, which, you can just look at the statistics. I'm fortunate I have a great wife. I've had a few, really good business partners. I've had some nightmares. And I think, my advice to people is you have a partner if it is required, if it is the right thing in your business model. But if it's not required, there are other ways to get there, which is you hire for that skill set. But
like you said, surrounding yourself with
100%.
people that complement your skills
Absolutely.
with what they're strongest at is something you may not be strongest at.
Exactly. And if you hire that person, if you have a true partner in terms of alignment, meaning like I consider you my business partner, we're in this together, but I own 100% of the company, like that's a different business, you know?
Right.
And so I'm a big believer in, to the extent you can, if it's your business, it's your idea, you are the control partner. Okay. If you bring someone on, you hire them, maybe they have a little bit of equity, but it has to be earned. So that's evolved and changed over time.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So my background was my father and grandfather were both entrepreneurs their whole life, and I saw my father running his own company, and I saw my father with a partner, and the same exact things that you were saying. If there's not a lot of synergy there, then the entire thing can blow up, and it becomes a failure for everybody.
It's tough. I mean, I think it's probably more, again, statistically, I've never looked at the statistics, but it's probably over the long haul, partnerships are probably more challenged than hiring that expert that pay them a lot of money. I've had plenty of companies where I'm the lowest paid in person. I own the company, but I pay someone with expertise a lot of money.
You value the people who are working for you also.
Right. They bring something really powerful and unique to the table, and they're worth it. But if it doesn't work out, it's not like a divorce. It is a thank you for your effort, and you're going to go off and be successful, but it doesn't tear my business apart. Yep. So that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So I had used the word tipping point earlier, and you had touched on from the business side how there's a lot of failure, especially with the first business people start. So what are one of those or two most common mistakes that people make starting companies to where they don't make it the 5 or 10 years and turn into an actual company?
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think if you look over a body of startups, the biggest reason startups aren't successful, unfortunately, is that they weren't really good ideas or products or businesses to begin with, and therefore should not have ever been a startup. And the good news is, especially these days, there are ways to test your ideas, to get real world feedback, to do a minimally viable product, to just get the absolute bare minimum out, to get customers on board, get feedback, so that you don't have to raise $1 million to see if it's a good idea.
Yep.
So I think the first thing is test, make sure you have an idea that's worth funding, worth starting, worth leaving your day job or whatever the risk is. Then I think the other reality is it's easy to fall in love with an idea, and because you get it and you understand it and you believe in it and you would buy it, to assume that the market is going to feel the same way.
Right.
Similar to the first point I made, but that one is a little bit more about the messaging and the marketing layer, and it's tough in the market right now to stand out. So you may have a better mousetrap, but good luck getting on Facebook and trying to tell the world about it, because everyone's on Facebook trying to tell the world about it.
Right.
So I like to sort of think about, if I have something I'm really excited about, or I'm working with a young entrepreneur that has a great idea, again, I'll go to that. Where is the leverage? Where is the distribution? So if you've got, let's say, this microphone, it's a better microphone, instead of you trying to build a company and a brand and market that microphone to the world, who's already selling microphones to millions of people? It's a lot easier to sell that microphone to them who already have the customers or get their distribution.
Right. Than to re-educate all the customers that are already out there.
Exactly. Yeah. And so another one of the filters I use a lot for my own kind of investments or companies or ideas that I'm working on is exactly that framework. Is I don't want to have a sales challenge. I don't want to have to educate the market on why this is something they should do. Yeah. I want to sell into existing demand. And in my course, I talk about sell what people want to buy and sell to people who want to buy.
Right.
Definitely true with investors. I mean, if you try to convince an investor to back your idea, but they're not an existing angel investor, they don't understand your industry, you're educating them on your company, your idea, the merits of being an angel investor versus the stock market, that's a tough sell versus going to an existing angel investor who already loves early stage companies, who already understands the risk, and all you're trying to do is educate them on the unique thing you're doing. That's somebody that wants to buy.
Yep.
So I think a lot about that, and I think that's a mistake a lot of younger, earlier stage entrepreneurs make.
Okay. So I think you're exactly right with one of the things with everything, but one that I want to focus on is there's a lot of noise in the market right now. We've had a really good, healthy economy for 9 years now.
Right.
And you and I have hit on this a little bit before. Is there a bubble in entrepreneurship where everyone is seeing people go out and just start companies and think that they can go do it also?
I actually don't think there is a bubble. I think there is a fundamental shift. I think when I was first an entrepreneur, and we're sitting here in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is historically maybe a little more conservative, a banking town, and I used to go to events with my kids at their school or something, and I would sit around and people would introduce themselves and say, "What do you do?" And it was I'm being a little stereotypical, but it was kind of banker, lawyer, banker, doctor, entrepreneur. And when I would say entrepreneur, or I would say I've got a small startup, they would say, "Oh," it's like they felt sorry for me, like, "Oh, you couldn't get a real job." Right. And so that's changed, right? And so now it's almost cool to be an entrepreneur in some ways. So what that leads to is, again, I want to start a company. I may not have a great idea. I may not be well equipped to do it. And therefore, there are going to be a lot of people that start companies that don't work. So that is part of maybe the bubble issue. Like, are they all going to work? No. But I think...
And is that because it's people going out that really should be number 2, number 5, number 10 in companies, and instead they're going out and they're trying to be number 1?
Exactly. That's exactly right. So the fundamental shift that I believe in is the shift away from big, giant corporate behemoths that hire tens of thousands of people. Those will still exist, but I think the reality is the view of risk has changed. So I don't feel safe and secure working at a big company because they can fire my whole division tomorrow. Yeah. I feel safe and secure controlling my destiny, knowing if I work hard, I can make money. So that shift to smaller business, more nimble, agile things, that's fundamental. That's going to happen. But should everyone be an entrepreneur or a founder or a CEO? I don't think so. I think there are a lot of people that are very much capable of adding a ton of value and making a ton of money and living a great life as an entrepreneur, but maybe they're the CFO and the CEO is someone different, or maybe they're
the marketing director or something like that.
Right. And they get in early, they get equity, they have upside. It's all of the benefits of being in a startup, which I believe in very deeply. But not everyone should be out raising money and flying I'm the CEO flag. Yeah. That's not for everybody.
Yep, perfect. So I want to go back to that tipping point comment because it leads into what we were just talking about. But now I want to look at companies instead of you as an individual.
Okay.
Let's assume that these companies that we're talking about, they're not the ones with the bad ideas where they really shouldn't be successful.
Right.
What's the tipping point to get people from a startup to a company? And what's the difference in your mind between those two?
Yeah, there are a couple different points of view on that. I mean, my personal opinion is it's not necessarily about profitability. I do think, I've had, again, companies all over the board. I've had companies that I have built, sold, and had a great outcome that never made $1 in profit. I have had other companies that were profitable from day one, and that was an important factor because of the sector that we were in or the structure of the business. So I don't personally look at profitability, but I do look at, sort of traction, sustainability as one of those key indicators. Like, it's an idea until you have customers that will pay for it or investors that will back it with enough sort of trajectory that, hey, we've got time to really prove this out.
Okay.
So that's maybe an early indication of it's working. But ultimately, I think it is that sustainable factor that takes you from a pure idea and an early stage startup to a business, which is, you lose one customer, you don't go out of business. Okay. Your server crashes, you don't go out of business. A key employee leaves, you don't go out of business.
And you probably don't have those conversations where you and your partner are at the coffee shop saying, "Can we make it another week?" Because
hopefully you've
got that build out if you're an actual business.
Exactly, and maybe you have that conversation, in the framework of hitting the next level or taking a big risk, which I'm a big believer in. Don't sit on cruise control or sit in idle. If you see a big opportunity, there's another gut check that's like, hey, we're safe and secure now. If we hire these 5 people, we launch a new product, we pivot to something new, there's this big reward, but there's a ton of risk. I'm okay with that. Yep. But if you want to have a true sustainable business, you shouldn't be having those conversations like, are we going to make payroll this weekend? Right. That should be sort of in the rearview mirror.
Okay. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. So with you working with entrepreneurs, what are some of those most common mistakes to where they can't get from the startup to the company?
The stereotypical entrepreneur, and this is again stereotype.
Right. Nothing that we're talking about is going to be universal for everybody.
Yeah. Stereotypical entrepreneur has a challenge letting go. They have a tendency to want to do and touch everything. So, and that some of that comes from the type of person that tends to start a company. Some of it comes from when you're a one-man show and you are doing the finances and the marketing and selling and writing code. Right. It's hard for you to bring someone else in and say, okay, I'm going to just now handle writing code. You do the finances because you're used to controlling it. But there's no real scale until you start letting go. And not only do you let go, you bring in people better than you. So if you're not great at finance, you bring in someone who's a CPA or has experience as a controller. And it's a gut check as an entrepreneur because they're not going to do it the way you did it. And so that's the hard part, right? It's like, wait a minute, you're not doing it the way I did it. They should be doing it better.
Right, that's why you're hiring.
That's why you're hiring. But it's still, I watch it day in and day out where entrepreneurs are really struggling through, how do I let go of something that feels important? I need to have that.
Yep.
And so that's a real common mistake that I see people have. And then the other is assuming that what worked yesterday is going to continue to work. And so that's why, over the years, even though it's a very old book, I've continued to tell, entrepreneurs, read Only the Paranoid Survive, because it plays out again and again and again that once you get to comfortable, variables change and what worked no longer works. So I like to see entrepreneurs have some level of paranoia that I need to always be learning, innovating, evolving, changing. And I've watched it again. Once an entrepreneur finally gets to settle, you can just see it in their bodies. They're like, oh, finally made it. And I'm like, no, you didn't make it yet. It's actually never over. So
right.
It's great to enjoy it. If you want to go out and do, take a trip with your family, whatever you want, of course you should enjoy it. That's why we're entrepreneurs. But don't assume that the formula you created 5 years ago is going to keep working, because it typically won't. And so that's a mistake I see as people starting to scale, is they just get kind of comfortable and complacent and thinking that can continue, and it rarely does.
Yeah, delegation and evolution.
Exactly right.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
So then I want to get out of running a company for a second and going into exiting a company.
Okay.
Because so I had sold my first company. It was when I started as a sophomore in college. So
awesome.
You're talking about the dorm or the dining room. Mine was a dorm room, so same type of experience. But a lot of people don't go through anything like that. Mm-hmm. So what's the motivation, or what got you to consider selling your first company?
My first one was really, it was really interesting because we never started the company to sell it. Yeah. We never had it in mind necessarily to sell it. We wanted a great business. And once we started to get to the point where we were profitable, we were starting to be able to pay ourselves a reasonable wage, is about the time all of a sudden our space kind of heated up and people came in. We had 3 companies kind of out of the blue want to buy the company. And my partner and I are sort of looking at each other like, why do they want to buy it? Like, what are they seeing? And the space was just heating up. And so we ended up selling the company to what we thought was the strongest of the 3. It wasn't even the best financial offer, but we thought, well, we're joining someone else's company, so who's the strongest?
Yeah.
And ironically, the series of things that happened, we sold it to a company. I very quickly decided I wanted to start another one. It was a good financial outcome, and that company went public. And so it was suddenly like the day after the IPO, I resigned. And so, but what that showed me was the financial benefits and the benefits for what I would call my team. I was able to give them a set of opportunities that either you had someone who was, technically a secretary that maybe just paid for their kids' college because they were a participant in this company.
Okay.
That felt great, and I wanted to see that for them and for myself. And I knew that they're not all entrepreneurs. They're not all going to go off and start companies. Some of them are going to be better off being a part of this great growing business. Yeah. I'm going to move on because that's what I want to do. Yeah. So I sort of felt that and those motivations, but then, again, just sort of candidly seeing the financial transaction and how that worked, I designed my next one thinking I'm going to sell this as soon as it makes sense, which was 14 months later.
Which is really fast.
Yeah. Sign of the times. I mean, some of that was just the market dynamics of the, that space. But yeah, I very much discovered what an exit means as an entrepreneur because it was not our plan for that first company. But then it sort of opened my eyes to, wow, there's a lot of opportunities. So.
Yeah. So when you're working with entrepreneurs, people starting companies, do you encourage them to try to build a company or try to build a company that they're going to be able to exit? And what's the difference between those philosophies? It
really depends on the entrepreneur and their goal. I mean, there are great entrepreneurs that have it is their life dream and passion to build something. And if they imagine themselves in 10 years running that business and, sitting in front of 1,000 employees or whatever their multi-year vision is, I try to help them map to that. And so personally, most of what I have done has been faster cycle times. Like I want to build a company that theoretically can exit in 3 years. But that's not for everybody. And so that has a lot of implications. So the biggest things I would say, and I talk a lot about this when I talk about raising capital, is the minute you take an investor's money, you're basically signing up for answering the question, how do they get a return?
Yep.
And so if you're raising money for a company, your exit or your liquidity event has to be part of the plan, because at least most investors are going to say, I'm glad you're excited and passionate, but I want my money. And so a lot of the way you build a business, if you're planning on selling or even want to have the option, is you need to know what do these buyers value so that you're building towards something they care about. If you build a business that no one values other than you, there is no buyer. That could be financial metrics. It could be intellectual property. It could be patents. It could be a team. There are lots of things that you can do to build value for a buyer, but you don't want to do that blindly, and you don't want to do that late in the process. You don't want to say, okay, I need to sell this company the next year. I wonder what people are going to, how they're going to look at my business. Like, that should have happened years ago.
Right.
So there is a playbook to do that. Doesn't mean someone's going to buy your company, but I philosophically believe if you build a great company with the mindset of I want it to be really valuable for a third party out there, whether it's a financial or strategic buyer, you end up with an amazing business. You can choose not to sell it.
Right.
We have a company right now that's doing awesome. I think we could sell it tomorrow if we wanted, but we don't have to.
Yeah.
And that's kind of I think the perfect place to be.
So at least having both options in mind, leaving the opportunity available because you don't know what you're going to want to do 5 years from now, 3 years from now.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a tough exercise for some entrepreneurs, but the framework I always use personally, and I recommend people use, is 3 years, because in today's kind of times, going much further out, too many things change. So if you're thinking, what's my 5 and 10 year plan? Like 10 years, are we going to be driving anymore? I don't know. I mean, so I like to think about 3 years because it's just far enough out that you can really have a big vision. You can really think about crafting an amazing business, but it's not so far out that you can't really see what's likely. And then once you get that 3 year vision, you start backing into it. If I want to sell the company in 3 years for $100 million, what needs to happen in 24 months? What needs to happen in 12 months? What do I need to do in the next 90 days to have that 12-month plan? So it allows you to kind of, design a business around it.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. So let's move into principles and philosophies, because I want to hit more on some of what your focuses are, right? And for anybody that hasn't gone to Mac's website, maclackey.com, read some of those articles. And one of them that really stuck out was the life wealth versus work-life balance.
Right.
So let's jump into that first.
No, that's something I'm really passionate about, and I think it is. A lot of people talk about work-life balance, and that is fine. It's a philosophy, it's an approach. But what that says to me is that means that you segment. I have time that I work, and I work, maybe it's Monday through Friday, and then I turn that off, and then on the weekends I spend time with my family, or I pursue my passion, if it's rock climbing or whatever it is. And for me, the other thing I don't like about that is what, Tim Ferriss, who I've enjoyed reading his stuff over the years, talks about sort of delayed retirement or delayed gratification. It's like, I'm going to work really hard for 5 years or 50 years so that I can travel when I'm 50, 60, 70. And I've sort of always believed in this philosophy of fusion, or what I call life wealth, which is, like we're sitting in my home office right now. When I finish this, I'm taking my kids somewhere. I'm going to be out in the backyard with the dogs. Doesn't mean I don't work hard. It means I control when and why and how I work. I think I put in as many hours, and always have, as probably anybody. Gary Vaynerchuk would say, 80 hours a week, 100 hours a week. I may put that in, but if I want to go to my kids' play at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, I'm going to do it. Maybe that means I work on a Sunday. So that idea of I'm always kind of in my family, in travel, in business, it's fused together, and it all is in alignment, is something that feels really good and healthy for me. And it's allowed me to do things that I think a lot of people sort of delay until they're 50, 60 years old.
Right.
In the middle of running companies, I've pulled my kids out of school and traveled to 15 countries, and we moved abroad, and I'm still running companies. And I was never willing to make the trade to say, if I do that, that means I can't grow a big business. That just means I have to be a lifestyle entrepreneur. I want to build big companies. I want to build stuff that matters and that I care about. I'm just not willing to sacrifice working and not seeing my kids because of that.
Yep. Was there something that happened or an experience that happened to where you started to develop that philosophy?
I was early in my career, very early. So my first company was probably stereotypical for me as well, meaning, we were working 24/7. I didn't have kids yet. I had a fiance. We got married during that business. She's been really healthy for me over the years, because I think I would have probably been a workaholic because of the way I'm wired. She would literally call me sometimes and say, you've been at the office for 2 days. I haven't seen you. And I fell asleep on the floor at the office, and she said, come home, and would hang up, and, and so of course, I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. I have been on like a 2-day bender, of work. And so that kind of happened up until the point where we literally sold a business in July of 2000. My first daughter was born in August of 2000. And I said to myself and my wife, I've worked so hard, I've done all this stuff. I don't want to miss anything. Even though a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old or a 12, whatever, they're not going to remember that you were there or not there, but I would remember. Yeah. And I didn't want to miss it, And so I just sort of committed that I'm going to be there. I'm going to be at every event. I'm going to be at if she learns to walk or talk or crawl or throw a ball or whatever it is, I'm going to see it, and I'm going to be there. And what's interesting about that, and which is what's led to a lot of stuff that I've done ever since, and I think has really helped me and helped hopefully a lot of people that I've worked with and been in business with, is I was therefore forced to say, how do you do that? Yeah. How does one build a, $10 million, $50 million, $100 million company and still able to go to their dance recital and carve pumpkins at school?
Not miss those.
Yeah, how do you do that? So I literally had to reverse engineer my companies around that sort of flexibility. It's literally what I work with people on now and that's why I call it life wealth, is you can't do that unless you design your business that if you have to be there, it won't work. Yeah. You have to, your culture has to be right. Your investors and your employees and your teammates all have to be aligned around how you want to work and how they want to work. They have to have a similar philosophy. If I'm not there to answer the phone and I'm maybe the top salesman and someone calls, my number 2 or number 3 or number 7 person better be able to articulate the same message that I would articulate. And so it's really a great way to reverse engineer a business, and it works. But that was really my motivation, is I'm not willing to make that trade.
Yeah, and I'm assuming with a lot of the companies you work with today, you're able to help them develop that business structure so they can get the same life wealth that you've been able to achieve.
Absolutely. And I'm really careful to say to people, like, everybody's priorities are different. I mean, it doesn't, it may be that you don't have a family, or of course your family is probably your priority if you have one, but maybe you have other things that are important to you. Maybe it's your your health, your workouts. You're going to climb Kilimanjaro. You have this bucket list. Whatever those things are, having a business that enables you to do them, that's important. But the other is, I just think it's a better way to build a business, because things happen. It doesn't mean that you're climbing Kilimanjaro. What if you get sick? What if you're out for a week? Like, is your business going to run effectively? What if your spouse needs you? You just, for whatever reason, you need to be in a different place or different thing. Life happens. And people design their businesses around one person, one process, and suddenly it doesn't scale. Things break. Things, just don't work. And so when you engineer a business to be existing without you, like, I have full confidence that as we sit here, anything I'm involved in is running pretty effectively, and whether I go into an office or not today changes nothing.
Right.
And there's some selfish benefit to that, but it's really more about designing a great business. Mm-hmm. It's not about, so I don't have to work. I'm not trying to not work. I like to work. Right. I just like to do it on my terms, and feel like if I can't go in or don't go in, the whole thing is going to fall apart.
Yep. So let's get down to the final few questions here, but I want to build off of what you just said. With people being able to do some of the things that's important to them. So what are some of those things in your life? What's most important to you in your life right now?
No, I think, I would definitely say, my family is and has been my priority. I have 2 daughters that they're awesome. They have their moments like everybody, but I want to spend a lot of time with them. My oldest daughter is literally looking at colleges now. She's about to go off to school. She's got 1 more year at home. So I can look back and say, did I make mistakes? Sure. But did I do everything I could to be there? And I know in my heart I did, right? And so that's been a priority, and I'm thankful that I can look back now and feel that. And hopefully it benefits them. It wasn't a burden that I've been around, but that's a big priority. And then, I have often looked at work as something I get to do, not something I have to do.
Okay.
And again, I'm not talking about a financial thing. It's like, I feel very fortunate that I get to work on things that I get a ton of energy out of. And to me, that is my intellectual stimulation, curiosity. It's like I need that to kind of get out of bed in the morning and be excited, and work is that thing for me. So yeah, I'd say my big passions in life, family, building businesses that I'm really excited about, and working with people I love to work with. I get a ton of energy out of that. And probably the other one is just kind of travel and experiences, which is something I really value and think is important. And we've seen that as a family, and hopefully it benefits my daughters in life. But it's a sacrifice. Even if you can do it technically, travel's hard, so you have to commit to doing it. It's expensive, it's hard, it's all that stuff.
You don't just wake up one morning and say, okay, we're going to go take a 2-week trip to Europe.
Exactly. Yeah, there are a lot of implications. Right. And so that's something that we're passionate about, we've committed to doing. Sometimes it's easier than others, but yeah, those are probably the big ones that stand out for me.
Perfect. Okay, last 2 here, both revolving around success, and we've hit on some great things throughout with success anyways, but how do you define success in your life today?
I think being able to look in the mirror and be proud of myself, which means to me, being a good person, being a good father, being a good husband, doing the right things, and have that at least lightly validated by people around me. That my wife feels like I'm a good husband, right. Not just me looking in the mirror telling myself. So I think that's an important measure. Maybe the most important measure of success is like, what kind of person do you become? That's a big one. And then, on the other piece, for me, it's controlling time, and so I think the ultimate level of success isn't necessarily money, it's time, and being able to say, I choose to, work, not work. I choose to play golf, not play golf. I don't play golf, so I think that's a waste of time. But if you like golf, you want to be able to do it. So being able to control time is to me one of the ultimate benefits of what we choose to do as entrepreneurs, what we work hard for. And if you're successful, you actually pull it off.
Right. Yep. No, it's great. So last one here, you and I are sitting here having a conversation 3 years from now.
Yeah.
What happened in that 3-year period where you can look back and say that was a successful 3 years?
Great question. For me, it is I am doing a lot of the stuff I'm doing today in terms of how I'm living. I've taken some amazing trips. Hopefully my family is healthy and happy and pursuing their own lives and dreams. My daughter's in college somewhere that she's really excited about, and my younger daughter's getting ready to go to college somewhere she's excited about. My wife and I are, happy in our lives. But from a business perspective, I would like to look back and say, I have legitimately helped thousands, maybe tens of thousands of entrepreneurs. So, trying to use lessons I've learned. We talked a lot about things that I feel strongly about today. And a lot of those, honestly, I've been blessed and fortunate. I've had some great outcomes. I've had 5 exits and all that kind of stuff. I've also been punched in the face a lot. Right. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've failed at things. I've had bad partnerships and bad business decisions. Those lessons learned are the ones that I want to be able to give back and say, you know what, rather than learn those lessons the hard way, let me help you avoid some of those. I mean, you can't avoid them all.
Right. Business
is tough. But I'm really hoping that in 3 years I can look back and say, wow, I created a platform with my website, with courses, with events I may do. So a lot of that's going to be free. I'm going to try to do as much as that, low cost, free. But I've really impacted, tens of thousands of people that wanted to build businesses and do it in a way that's consistent with, again, what I call life wealth, that they're not dying of heart attacks in their 40s because they worked themselves to death. I don't want that for anybody.
Right. Yeah. No, perfect. That's a great place to end. So for the audience, where can they reach you? Where should they go to get more information from you?
So, well, thank you for that. My site is maclackey.com, MacLackey.com. Most of what I'm doing and about to do is going to sort of be based from that site. And then on all the sort of social networks, it's generally, at Mac Lackey, or if you Google Mac Lackey, that's probably the best place to find me, is follow me on social. Definitely, if you sign up on my site, then you're going to stay updated on things I'm working on, events I'm doing, stuff I'm giving away. That's probably the best way. Is just go to my site, sign up as a friend of mine.
Perfect. I love it. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks a lot. Best of luck.
Thanks.